Part of the benefit of the sauna, however, lies in the very fact that one sets aside a time for relaxation, pure and simple. From Bernard Helo's book, The Sauna Is.
Hi, this is Nala, and welcome back to the Sauna Trail podcast. Join us in our adventures as we share the story of how our family discovered the world of Finnish sauna. You might be wondering why anyone would do a podcast dedicated to something as commonplace as sauna. It's like doing a podcast about paper, carrots, or remote controls. Well, if you stick around, you might find out that there's more to sauna than you realized. Our last couple of episodes were about building or buying a sauna and sauna accessories. Even though it doesn't follow the chronological timeline of our sauna trail, we want to share our thoughts on buying and building principles for any of our listeners who have been bitten by the Lolu bug. If you haven't listened to it, we break down the principles of sauna that someone should take into consideration as they contemplate getting a sauna. Today we get back on the sauna trail and we'll talk about our first hotel sauna after discovering Finnish sauna, our first barrel sauna, and a trip to the North Shore. We promised this episode a few weeks ago, and to the disappointment of one of our listeners, Uncle Dan, we postponed it, but now here it is.
Just to orient everyone to our timeline, we first learned about Finnish sauna in the spring of 2015. So the saunas that we talk about in this episode, we visited in the fall of 2015. Our first stop today is Lake Tahoe. We were invited to meet up with our dear friends Dave and Lisa Frisbee. Dave and Lisa were actually more like a second set of parents for me. Our kids called them Grandpa Dave and Grandma Lisa. Dave actually officiated our wedding, so they are some very special people in our lives. Anyway, they invited us out there to meet with them and go on vacation. So we stayed at a resort, and it had an outdoor pool along with his and her saunas. I don't remember if they were separate buildings or if they were in a locker room, but I just remember they were separated. So Christopher and I each had to go to a different one. So one afternoon when the kids were napping or hanging out with Grandpa Dave and Grandma Lisa, Christopher and I put on our suits and went to go check out the saunas. Just a reminder that this was our first like hotel or gym sauna after we had figured out what real sauna was. So I wanted to just share what we thought about it after that. So Christopher, what do you remember from the men's sauna?
Well, I was excited that the place we were staying had one because we already knew that we enjoyed sauna. And at this point, the only time that we could use sauna was if we went on vacation somewhere. We didn't have local access to one. I don't remember it being that good. It was a little disappointing. I'm not sure the temperature got super high. It was probably 170, 180. You could make steam on the rocks, but there was one big issue with this sauna, which is the floor was carpeted.
Yeah, the women's was also carpeted.
And so that was pretty weird.
Were you able to put water on the rocks?
I think so. I think I did.
Did you bring something to put water on the rocks? Because there was nothing in the women's, like there's no buckets, no ladles.
I don't recall. And I've always tried to be creative about that, whether it's a water bottle or finding something to put water on the rocks.
Oh, you probably brought water in.
Yeah.
I did not.
Yeah. And there also was another little hiccup with this sauna experience, which is I got pretty badly sunburned the day before. And so I wasn't sure how sauna was going to be for that. So I had to ask in the online forum if people sauna'd when they got sunburned. And they said they did, and it helped. I'm not sure it really helped so much with my sunburn. I get sunburned pretty easily, and it was bad. So overall, it wasn't a sauna that I would seek out to use again.
Yeah, I don't remember how hot the woman's was either. I did eventually sweat. I do remember that. But it was kind of gross that there was carpet in there. And then when I finally left, I want to say that I rinsed off, but I don't remember rinsing off. And I remember just going into the pool. That's really disgusting. But I don't think there was a place for me to rinse off. So the water was in the pool was nice and cool. I remember that. Like I remember generally I don't love swimming in pools because they're too cold. But after the sauna, I was like, oh, this is nice. I just sat in a chair and waited for Christopher to get done because I didn't really want to go back in the sauna. Like it, that didn't sound very nice to go back into it. So
Yeah, and honestly, Lake Tahoe is like a perfect place for sauna. It's in Northern California. It's very wooded. Lake Tahoe is a deep, I think relatively like clean and cool lake. So there should be a pretty vibrant sauna culture there. But I don't think that there is.
no, no. So that was interesting for me because I never liked saunas, hotel, gyms. I never liked those. So to go into one after learning that I do like sauna, it was disappointing. Like I don't even think my sauna was 170 or 180. Like I'm guessing it was 150.
Yeah, and
So
the heater was probably several years old and not tons of rocks, and I think I only remember using it one time, so I didn't even think we bothered to use it a second time.
no, definitely not. Definitely not. So my disappointment with hotel saunas continued. So the next one that we're going to talk about is the first barrel sauna experience that we had. And actually, I shouldn't say we because it wasn't me. It was actually Christopher and Rebecca. So I'll let them explain that.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with a barrel sauna, it's just like if you picture a big wooden barrel, but it's turned on its side so that you have the round circle on either end of the side, and it just has staves all the way around and then benches inside. And I think the plan was originally for me to go with my brother to try it out. We were looking for saunas that were somewhat nearby that we could go use. Like I said, that's the only way that we could use a sauna. We didn't know of any in our area. And so we found one at this place called Norwegian Wood, which is kind of like a retreat crafting type of place just outside the Twin Cities in Princeton, Minnesota. And I don't think they're open anymore. So people usually go there and do some sort of crafting or wool type retreat, kind of getaway. But the owner of this retreat was willing to let us come there and use their barrel sauna for a few hours. My brother ended up not being able to go, so I decided to make it a little father-daughter adventure and go check out this place. Becca, what do you remember about this sauna and Norwegian Wood?
I remember that it was kind of rainy when we went, and the barrel, it only had one level of benches, and my feet had to be on the floor, and it was like cold, and I did not like that. And I missed not having a changing room because every time we went out, I felt like all the heat was leaving, and the heat was pretty harsh and intense in there, but not necessarily hot. I don't remember it being very hot.
Yeah, we'd already trained you guys pretty well that the first rule of sauna. Well, the first rule of sauna was, who remembers what the first rule of sauna is for our family?
Shut the door.
Nope, that's the second rule. And but we'd already taught you that rule, to shut the door, to not let the heat out. But what was the first rule? Who remembers?
Don't be a sauna clown.
Yeah, no whining.
Yeah,
No
no
whining
whining.
in the sauna. And this was a wood-fired barrel sauna that was fed from the outside. So that was one of the few exterior feed saunas I think I had used. What other thoughts or memories do you have of that place?
After we sauned, we went inside of like the larger main building, and they had a whole wall of like wool yarns and stuff, and it was, I don't know if it was just because I was small and everything seemed big then, but the room felt really big and like just full of crafting stuff. And the lady had some homemade kombucha on her kitchen counter, And she's like, do you want to try some kombucha? And I was like, and she's just handing me a glass of it. And I was like, okay, I don't even know what this is. It didn't look very good in the jar. And I tasted it and I was like, I don't really like this. But I think I finished the cup just to be polite. But yeah.
Oh, good job.
Yeah, she was a very gracious host, especially for two strangers who wanted to come sauna. I remember that I remember it being pretty warm. Well, actually, I don't remember. It's in my notes that it was pretty warm. So who knows like what that temp was during that first year of our sauna. And that there was no smoke smell inside the sauna when you fed it because it was an exterior feed. So that was one advantage of the exterior feed. But I also had a chance to reflect on the difference between that and an interior feed, which is a constant debate in the sauna community of which do you go with, exterior feed or interior. The interior was nice because you can stoke it while you're in the sauna. So if you know that it needs a log, you can just put it right in. I do remember the steam being fairly persistent in that sauna. It was probably quite a bit smaller sauna than some of the others that we had used, so the steam was intense.
Yeah, I do remember that now that you mention it.
So overall, it was a decent experience. I felt like there were possibilities to get hot and make steam, and it didn't have carpet on the floor, so that was pretty nice. And spoiler alert, our first sauna that we ended up getting was a barrel.
So we'll share that story in a later episode of how that came about. But we do eventually get one.
Yeah, just a little tease as we end up with our friend Jeff Pizek's barrel sauna. And we'll talk about meeting him and how we ended up with his old barrel. But we had many good sauna rounds in that barrel. I tell people that a barrel can be pretty good if you have a cold plunge and you're able to heat it up to a good temp and you have friends and maybe even some good sauna sausage. Overall, you put all that package together and that's a pretty decent sauna experience.
Yeah, there's debate about whether a barrel sauna is a real sauna, and I think for us, for what Christopher just mentioned, I think it is a real sauna. I think we were able to get it, hot enough to steam and sweat and wash down in between, and there's a drain so that you can wash up and use lots of water. So that debate probably will just continue forever.
Yeah, it is a little intense on the heat, especially if you're sitting next to the stove, and it can be a little bit cramped. But, every sauna has its own compromises. And if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of that, you just check out our previous episode about building or buying a sauna for details on that.
So now we'll move on to the last sauna that we want to share about. It was at Larsmont Cottages in Two Harbors, Minnesota, so on the north shore of Minnesota. This was, I think, my first trip to the North Shore, because even though I grew up in Minnesota, we didn't travel north. So this was kind of an adventure for me to go see what this was like. Have you been up there before, Christopher?
Yeah, the North Shore of Lake Superior. We should clarify for people not from the area from the region. A little bit to Duluth, but hadn't really spent much time on the North Shore of Superior.
So again, these saunas, it wasn't like we traveled back to back to them. There's some time in between each of these visits. And so I think this was just another place that Christopher found that was within relatively close driving distance so that we could go use another one because it'd probably been a few months since we last used one. So before we went, I think, Christopher, I remember you being on the phone with them and asking them questions about the sauna, and the staff really couldn't answer many of your questions.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by that because we wanted to know, like, did you reserve a time? If we were going to sauna as a family, could we reserve a time? When was it heated versus not heated to try and even understand how it worked? And the staff didn't seem to really understand why you would sauna or be able to answer questions about it very readily. And maybe that's changed. That was several years ago. So I hope it's changed.
I think it's changed. This was 9 years ago from today.
And really, that's not too uncommon that we found hotels or gyms or resorts that a lot of these places, they might have a sauna as an amenity that they got that they know, oh, people like saunas. But then the staff doesn't really even understand it that well.
Right. So we finally made our way up there, checked into our room, and it's really quite a nice place. In the summer, they have these bonfires along the lake, along the shore, with chairs, with s'mores making things. They have a lot of just different areas for games and activities for families. It was quite nice. So we went to go check out the sauna, and we went to go use it the first evening because I think we probably got there later in the afternoon, had dinner, and then everybody got into their suits and we walked down to the sauna. And I remember that there was a changing room. So we walked into the changing room and there's a window so we could see into the sauna, into the hot room. And there were two teenagers in there and they were like wearing gym clothes, like fully clothed in the sauna, sitting on the bench. We were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Um, so the So just to give you a little idea of the setup, so they had a changing room. They had a wood-fired Nipa stove that was fed from the changing room. So not in the hot room, but from the changing room. And it was set a little bit from the water. So when we first went, it was in the evening. It was dark, and I couldn't see a path to the water. And so I didn't go into the water. But I think, did you go into the water, Christopher, that first
I
evening?
don't know if I did. Like you said, it was set back a little ways from the water, and there was a small cliff kind of right by the sauna. To get in the water, you had to go further down the shore just a little bit to kind of this rocky area. So I really only remember going in the next day.
Yeah, and I think we went in as a family, and I think eventually the teenagers left. Um, I don't remember much of the hot room. Like, I'm sure we put water on the rocks, but I don't really remember. But yeah, so then the next morning we did go use it again. Christopher actually went by himself first, and I stayed in the room with the kids. And I remember it was a beautiful sunny day, and he came back and he's like, "Oh, you should go use the sauna." And then there's a little area when you walk down, there's a little area for you to get into the water. And so he finally convinced me to go try it by myself. Um, and it was nice. I don't think there was anybody else in there. I don't remember how hot it was. Do you?
I don't remember either. Probably wasn't super hot, but it's wood fired, so if you put the time in, you can get it. You can get it warm.
And I remember you coming back from that sauna, and that was the time when you said it was empty in the sauna. There was nobody else there, and you were in there for a really long time, and you said that you loved sauning in silence. I remember that's the first time you said that.
That's interesting. I don't remember that. Um, I do like to sauna in silence still to this day. uh, but the shore is rocky, right? Like there were larger rocks, and there was an area in the rocks that um, the water was a little bit warmer because it go into these. It was like a little, what do you call them?
It was just like a little pool, a little indent in the rock.
Yeah, yeah. So the water was cool, but not like frigid. And it was just very nice to get in there and then just sit on the rock and feel the sun on you and relax. And I think there were a few people that walked by and kind of stared at me like, what is this lady doing? But I don't know. I was enjoying myself.
Yeah, and then I did make the girls. I don't remember if the boys did. I made them go get beyond their comfort zones and go out into the water, into that little pool. Do you girls remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember being scared half to death because I didn't want to fall and slip on the rocks and drown. I wasn't going to. It was like, what, maybe a foot, 2 feet deep or something in one of the pools area that we went in. But it was cold too. I don't remember getting in the water at all at that place.
Did we send just the two of you down, or did one of us go with you? Did you go with them?
I think maybe they went alone and then I went just a little bit later.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So that was an interesting experience. Like you had mentioned earlier, I think things have changed a little bit because last year, they had like a big Larsmont sponsored or held a big mobile sauna event. So I'm guessing that hopefully their sauna knowledge and understanding what they have there has increased, and they're actually able to utilize it to their advantage, really, because it is such a nice amenity. It was a nice sauna. The changing room was nice and big, and the hot room was a good size. So hopefully they're able to train their staff on how to let guests know about it and how to use it.
Yeah, and the how to use it is really the important part. You can have a billion mobile saunas in your town, but if no one knows how to use it, it's not going to be that great of a benefit. It'll still be nice. I would still take the billion mobile saunas, but we need to root ourselves like deeply in like the Finnish practice of sauna. At least understand that, and then if people want to make it their own and morph from there, go for it. That's how sauna practice got to be what it is. And I think I wrote an article about our experiences that I put on the Sauna Digest website, which we'll actually talk more about that Sauna Digest website in the next episode. And we've been showing you some pictures inside the Larsmont sauna, but they've remodeled their sauna since then. So I'm not sure what kind of changes they've made. And for those listening in the audio version, there'll be 360s of that sauna in the show notes. That kind of wraps up talking about those three different saunas, one kind of semi-public and two public ones, and they kind of ran the whole spectrum of how good. So how would you characterize our experience of using public saunas over the past 8 years after we discovered what real sauna was? Are they generally good or poor? What would you say?
I don't know how many the kids have used in terms of public saunas.
I think a few, like a couple hotel ones, maybe.
Yeah, most of the public saunas I've used since we discovered Finnish sauna have been at hotels, I think. I don't ever really use them, even when we have the opportunity at a hotel. I honestly don't really see it as, I'm doing quotes here, sauna. It gets kind of hot. You can sometimes put steam on, or, if we're with you, Dad, and you'll figure out a way to get steam. Yeah, I don't find a lot of enjoyment in using them.
I don't like using them just to use the sauna, but if we're like going swimming and there's a sauna, we'll go in there and warm up if we get cold, but not worth it without the swimming.
Yeah, it's mainly just frustrating for me. Like, you can't get hot. You have to sit in there forever. And even if you sit in there forever, you still might not get hot, so.
Yeah, I still don't think I enjoy them. There's signs that you can't put water on the rocks, so there's no, unless you're bringing your own water in. But then my concern is, I don't know how dusty those rocks are, if anybody cleans them, and if now you're putting if you're putting water on those rocks and then you're creating steam, like how dusty is that steam? Like how clean is that steam? And so even then, I don't really like to do it. And then, I mean, I haven't run into any more that have carpet, but they're not very hot. They're maybe 160. 170, but then people are constantly coming in and out, and they're coming in after working out, and they're sweaty and gross, and I don't know. I just still don't really like them.
Yeah, it's really hit or miss. Your mileage may vary. You might find one that's kind of decent, but the majority won't be very good. I've heard it said online that any sauna is a good sauna, but I vehemently disagree with that. I think a good Finnish sauna ruins a lot of those saunas that I would have been okay with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people who say every sauna is a good sauna haven't used enough bad saunas. And I think I've been in enough bad saunas where I'm like, I'd rather just sit in my hotel room than do this subpar, no water, no rinsing, not hot enough, no steam. And then there's no place to rinse off. So now I'm walking out of there and I'm just sweaty, sit in my own sweat, and there's no place to rinse off unless I go jump in the pool, and that's gross. So I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think every sauna is a good sauna.
Thanks for joining us today as we return to the sauna trail. Next week, we don't visit any saunas, but we discuss cultivating connections in the sauna community. If you haven't yet, join our locals community and say hi. You can share photos of your sauna or sauna trail adventures there. It's free to sign up and you'll get regular updates from us. If you appreciate what we're doing and want to financially support this podcast, Locals has that option as well. The address is thesaunatrail.locals.com. We appreciate all of our supporters and fellow sauna hounds. Our podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and other streaming platforms, as well as our website, thesaunatrail.com. New episodes release Saturdays, which is the traditional Finnish day for sauna, also called Sauna Päivä. We hope to see you on the sauna trail.